Other evils there are that may come, for Sauron is himself but a servant or emissary. Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today, I wanted to share my thoughts on an interesting conversation, the topic of which was inspired from Darth Gandalf's video on this very topic, linked alongside some other articles and videos in the description and cards, so please go check that out. The topic of today's video is could, or more importantly, would there be another Dark Lord after the fall of Sauron, and if so, who would they be? This will be different from my other videos and will mostly contain my speculations after I go through a bit of lore, but that is also why I want to reiterate that this, like all my other videos, is a conversation, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this matter in the comments below. My friends, thank you all so much for being here. Let's begin our tale. First, let's go through the lore and canon of what Tolkien gave us, mostly basics that are well known but are also relevant to this conversation. Before we wrap all of this together and go into some speculations, let me say that it is important how we define the term Dark Lord in this conversation. There were creatures like Ungoliant or Smaug and Durin's Bane, or even the Witch King and Saruman that were not considered Dark Lords, and there were really only two Dark Lords in Middle-earth. So therefore I should say that, based on Tolkien's writings, a Dark Lord would be the pinnacle evil during an age in Middle-earth who commands armies of great power and evil. Thus, there were two main Dark Lords and villains in Tolkien's works, Morgoth and Sauron, who certainly do have their differences, which I should discuss more in a different video, but are, especially in a thematic and overarching sense, quite similar to each other. Beneath or alongside them, you have some very powerful servants or allies, Balrogs and dragons like Gothmog and Glaurung respectively, among others under Morgoth, including Sauron himself, and Nazgul under Sauron, with Saruman serving his greater designs in many ways. While Morgoth was equivalent to and formally a Vala, outcast from that order, and Sauron was a Maya, Tolkien set his main evils as great and looming powers in the world. They were even in some ways spiritual or religious forces as well. One was practically a god, and the other basically an archangel. And their servants or allies were also very powerful creatures or Maiar in their own right as well, especially in Morgoth's case. I say all of this to depict how the Dark Lords of Middle-earth defined themselves apart from the evils that served or allied with them. Yet still, as Middle-earth progressed, the title of Dark Lord did technically fall into weaker hands, from Morgoth to Sauron. With that said, a new Dark Lord in the Fourth Age or beyond would likely therefore be weaker than Sauron, and they would have to be for the West to be able to defeat them once again. But now that we get into my speculations, let's start with the first part of the question: would there even be another Dark Lord? I believe there would be another Dark Lord. Actually, there would probably be multiple Dark Lords as time progressed, who in some ways followed in the steps of Sauron and Morgoth in the attempt to have a victory of evil of their own, to either do what the former Dark Lords could not, or something of a smaller, weaker scale. The ends of the ages are generally marked by great conflicts against these Dark Lords, give or take a few years and events. The Years of the Lamps and the Years of the Trees ended when, or a few years after, Melkor destroyed the lamps and the trees. Classic Melkor. The First Age ended after Melkor's final defeat as Morgoth in the War of Wrath. The Second Age ended after the defeat of Sauron during the War of the Last Alliance. The Third Age ended a few years after Sauron's final defeat in the War of the Ring. Evil, especially great evil like that of these Dark Lords, was apparent in Middle-earth, and it all began with Melkor and his discourse in the music of the Ainur, and his marring of Arda, and his rebellions that inspired, or rather corrupted, other beings. Melkor certainly brought many evils together and out of the obscurity of the darkness of the early world, and I believe that evil and darkness would always have some place in Middle-earth, but they would never be truly victorious or reign supreme. So almost certainly, there would be another Dark Lord, as indicated in Tolkien's ideas put forth in his early, uncompleted draft of the Lord of the Rings sequel, The New Shadow, which I discuss more in depth in a different video. So what would this evil be? We have a few ideas of what could have been possible. The great evils of the Third Age, from Smaug to Durin's Bane to the Nazgul to Saruman to Sauron himself, were all defeated and slain by the end of the age. However, the east and south of Middle-earth leave much potential unexplored. The Blue Wizards, for instance, either both together or just one, if they had indeed been evil, could have presented a huge threat to the west, especially after Gandalf and the elves left these shores. They were Maiar, of course, and their fates were unknown. It is entirely possible that the Blue Wizards could have rallied cults of Morgul or Morgoth, and purveyed other sorts of dark magic in the east and or south to oppose Gondor, to destroy it in the early centuries of the Fourth Age, or beyond. However, I do not endorse this theory, as Tolkien's later thoughts on the Blue Wizards saw them as unsung heroes who helped the West in their own ways. Besides this, Tolkien had already written through the idea of an evil tyrannical wizard with Sauron. I don't think with another villain he would have gone this way exactly. It is also possible that some great creature like a dragon of the north could have been another Dark Lord, but I highly doubt it. Most of these creatures and others with similar evil or power were slain in the Elder Days, or the Second or Third Ages, and I get the feeling that the end of Sauron and the elves leaving the shores of Middle-earth saw a thematic end of much of the magic and mystic parts of Middle-earth for good and evil. Besides, many of Tolkien's creatures were not written with the influence that a character like Sauron or Morgoth had, with the most likely exception being something like Glaurung. While there were certainly some legacies of magic things left, including small drakes or dragons perhaps, they too were simply remembrances of the grander versions of such things from the past, at least in keeping with Tolkienian themes and ideas. So I do doubt such a creature would be another Dark Lord, especially since Tolkien had worked with so many of these creatures in past stories. Then there's the idea of a Black Númenórean or some servant of Sauron left over from his fall, like the Mouth of Sauron or something like that, with the descendants of Castamir and other traders of Gondor or Númenor in Umbar or Harad or something. Especially with the descendants of the Kingsmen and the Black Númenóreans, it could be that some legacy of evil left over from the Third Age or before could have risen to oppose Gondor and the West, especially from an outside territory, city, or kingdom. While I do find this to be more likely than the Blue Wizards, I still think that since Tolkien had already had many conflicts for Gondor from without its borders during the late Second Age and entirety of the Third Age, I do not think it is very likely he would have found this path of writing desirable. What's more, we know that Éomer and Aragorn led their people to victory and peace with at least some of the men of the East and South, so this would have changed that, at least in part. That leaves us with perhaps a few more options, but really the only one that comes to my mind, the option for another Dark Lord and his minions, that seems most plausible to me and in line with the New Shadow sequel, is that a Dark Lord would have actually come from within Gondor or within some part of the West itself. In Tolkien's letter 256, as described in the Tolkien Gateway article in the description, Tolkien spoke about how the novel of The New Shadow would have seen the depreciation of good in the world of men, as we quickly become satiated with good, and then we stop valuing it as much. And this is one of our greatest flaws as people, according to Tolkien in this letter. He would have written about the descendants of Aragorn, who likely would have faltered in their virtue, as the people of Gondor did the same. There would have been satanic cults, likely worshipping Morgoth or Sauron, revolutionary plots, boys causing damage playing at being orcs, and so forth. This sequel sounds like it would have been far more conspiratorial and smaller scale, far less in scale than its predecessors. And it would have explored the evil of men, the decline of people into civil conflicts amongst themselves, and likely it would have mirrored our own human history far more than the fantastical history of the Elder Days through the Third Age. Likely, in my speculations at least, the Dark Lord would have been some head of this cult or conspiracy that was hurting Gondor, probably a man from within his own society who had become radicalized or fascinated with tales of the previous Dark Lords. And this makes sense in my mind and works into further connecting Middle-earth as a fictional history into our own real world, as the greatest evils in our history have been caused by the evils of men, rather than something like Sauron or Melkor. And this also continues the idea that the Dark Lords would become weaker in strength, as each successor of the title was weaker than the last. So again, it depends on your definition of Dark Lord. Could something as small scale as a man against a kingdom of men be considered a Dark Lord? I'm not sure, especially a Dark Lord in all of Middle-earth, but I think this would be the closest thing to it. But again, this is a conversation, so what do you all think? What would the next Dark Lord have been, if you believe there, in fact, would have been one like I do? I suppose I say that there certainly would have been some versions of Dark Lords to come had Tolkien continued on writing books after The Lord of the Rings, or if Middle-earth did become more like our real world. However, even after saying all of this throughout the video, let me add this point. I really like that Tolkien ended the stories of Middle-earth where and when he did. He kept the escapism going, and had virtue and good in the hearts of men overcome what evils might have awaited them in future ages. He gave us a world of peace and hope in the end of his story for us to strive towards. And so we come to the end of my thoughts on this topic. We see that in how Tolkien left Middle-earth after the Third Age. In the real world, we can hope to work towards a place where we always appreciate good, virtue, and peace, both individually and as a society. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video on this really interesting topic. Absolutely let me know your thoughts on this conversation in the comments below. I'm excited to read them and to see if there was something I missed or didn't think about. If you enjoyed, please hit that like button and share this with a friend. Thanks to our Valor tier patrons, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putin, Mark Kralik, Blair Scout and Merton, John Hume, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Reese Jenkins, Adam Petrolik, Brandon Glidden, Molly Sullivan, Daniel Burns, Anthony Harmon, Dorwin Gray, Arthur Merlin, and DJ Vaught. Thank you all so much, and thanks to all of our patrons and YouTube members. It really means a lot. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again next week with a video on the Argonath, the Pillars of the Kings. You all are the best, my friends. Thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.